keynote speaker. We have a privilege of hearing from Professor Diana Laurillard, Chair of Learning with Digital Technologies at University College London Knowledge Lab. She has been driving force in leveraging digital tools to reform pedagogy, with the decades of experience and distinguished academic background, including PhD from the University of Surrey. Professor Laurillard's work has significantly impacted how we conceptualize and implement digital learning strategies. Professor Laurillard has holds honorary doctorates from esteemed universities, attest to her pursuit of educational excellence and accessibility. Her insights into cognitive and conceptual factors of student learning have paved the way for groundbreaking advancement in digital education. It's an honor to welcome Professor Diana, whose expertise in digital learning continues to inspire educators worldwide.
It's really a great honor to be able to be here, not only because I've always wanted to visit Mongolia all my life, and now I'm here, which is great, but also because the mission of this event today is so important, being about open education and what we can do to use open education resources and techniques and technologies to meet some of our biggest education challenges. And that's precisely what I want to talk about, and in particular, the transformative power of teacher collaboration in developing these new technologies. So, the outline for the argument in the title is to begin at this global level of the overarching framework for our discussions, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I would like to argue that UN Sustainable Development Goal 4 for education is the most important of all of them. And then at the other end of the scale, our key issues in this conference are to understand what our students need from ICT and what our plan for the new development pedagogies therefore has to be. So my proposals are that ICT offers better support for active and social learning, and then secondly, that it's the teachers whom we must trust to develop new digital pedagogies, because after all, they're the ones who are there to test and develop that new knowledge every day. But there's an awful lot to learn, and they don't have the time to do that on their own as individuals. So essentially, teachers need to collaborate in this process, to share and develop new ways of using ICT. So then the question becomes, how do we put that idea into practice of teachers collaborating to innovate? And I've organized the talk around these basic challenge questions. So there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where UN SDG 4 for education is challenging because we need 44 million new teachers by 2030. And universities will play a major role in developing those teachers. But it also asks for quality lifelong learning, which is what we've been hearing about today. And that means that education must underpin all the other SDGs as well. And it's in that context that I think it really is the most important of all the SDGs. Because although we have the responsibility for developing our students as the professionals whose job it will be in future years to meet those goals, it's the current professionals also who need us to contribute to their lifelong learning, because they are the people whose policies and practices and actions need to change now if we're to meet the UN goals. Okay, so how can ICT improve learning? And to answer this, we have to go back to the question of what it takes to learn. And it's useful to break this question down into the 6 basic types of learning, beginning with learning through acquisition. That's basically reading, watching, and listening as the most common mode of learning for students. And digital media, of course, contribute a great deal to that, so we'll discuss that. But then we have to be clear about what ICT can do for these 5 different types of active and social learning through inquiry, discussion, practice, collaboration, and production. How can ICT contribute to helping students in all these different ways. So here's the theory behind how learning happens in formal education. It's called the conversational framework. It's been developed from 100 years of research on student learning, and it enables us to see the teaching and learning process as a series of iterations between the learner at the center, who's working on the two levels of concepts and practices, and is interacting with the teacher on the one hand, and also with other learners who are also working on those two levels of concepts and practices. And as teachers, we're interested in trying to get students to keep developing both their concepts and their practices, and to understand excuse me, the relations between them. So it's our job to keep those cycles turning of developing concepts and developing practices. And we do that by trying to make sure that we introduce all these different types of learning and interaction into the teaching learning environment. Okay, so each of those 6 learning types is distinctive in the way in which the teacher can promote those recurring cycles of concept and skill development. Through acquisition, where the student is learning through reading or watching or listening to the teacher, and that helps them change and develop their concepts. And the other learning types are different because they all involve deliberate activity by the learner. They're all types of active learning. For example, learning through inquiry, where the student is developing their own questions to the teacher's concepts, whether that's expressed as a human being or in a book or a website or wherever. And then learning through practice, where the teacher sets up a learning environment for the learner to work with and try things out and then develop both concepts and practices in that way. And then learning through discussion, where they're arguing with their peers or negotiating ideas with each other, debating, challenging each other, and so on, and so have to keep developing their concepts as they go. Learning through collaboration, where they share their practices with each other, which they've been developing in the learning environment, but also discuss and generate ideas in that way as well. And then finally, there's learning through production, where they pull all those ideas together. What have they learned? And they express that in some way and produce something for the teachers or others to assess. So each of those types of learning will be familiar to everybody who's ever taught, because we need that wide range of methods we've always used in conventional teaching and learning. The technologies of teacher presentations or readings, the library for inquiry, labs or exercises for practice, discussion groups, group projects for collaboration, and finally, any kind of writing reports or producing something as a form of assessment when they produce something. But now the question is, how can ICT help students in all these different ways? So let's go through each of those one by one. And for university students, access to knowledge and engagement with new concepts and practices comes from reading, watching, listening, as I said. And digital textbooks now can extend their work via the library bulk buying digital textbooks for all their students, the main textbooks which will also offer tools for supporting their work on the book. All these different tools here for analysing the text, comparing one text with another, annotating it, organising their personal library around their work, and of course having access to the books wherever they are. And then watching a video can give students a valuable insight into a system or mechanism, such as this free animation. It's on the web, it's available for understanding the process of mitosis in biology. And then podcasts offer academics the chance to talk informally around a key topic, such as the one which is so topical with your new MOOC on the nomadic archaeology of Mongolia. And so the teacher can talk about any kind of key topic for students to engage with at any time. So it's not just all about PowerPoint. So learning through acquisition then is where the teacher is communicating concepts and ideas that change some of the learner's concepts, and then they present some more and they develop some more, as we hope. But the learners in this case are not needing to generate any ideas themselves. this means this is the least active form of learning. So we're looking for something a bit more than that. In learning through inquiry, students learn by exploring contrasting ideas and ways of representing them. So I tried looking on the internet for alternative representations of the science topic of the water cycle. And there are masses of images. Some of them are interactive to some degree. Many could transform the student's way of exploring and improving their understanding. So that learning through inquiry means students are being more active. They are doing the exploring. They're driving that process of finding out what ideas to look for. And then those continued iterations produce more conceptual activity because they're now actively generating questions and finding answers. The more of these cycles there are, the more opportunities they have to change and develop their ideas. So that's learning through inquiry. And then learning through discussion, of course, is transformed by ICT. Normally only 1 or 2 students can answer a teacher's question. So look at this example with a Menti site where you ask students to post in their own ideas on a particular topic. They can work in groups and then post their responses to the teacher's questions. So every single student in the room is involved and they can all see each other's responses. And I'm hoping that you might join in with this process with me now by giving you this code where you can go to the Menti site, type in the code, and then put your own questions or comments in, not just now, but after the lecture, and then we can go and iterate through that process some more. So those same iterations are happening through learning through discussion, where the social construction of ideas helps learners develop their concepts. They generate questions, they receive feedback from their peers, they respond with answers to their questions, and again, these iterations engage them in the process of developing their concepts and ideas. And of course, they can also discuss with the teacher as well in that same process. And that's learning through discussion. Then learning through practice, one of the most important uses of digital methods is for learning through practice, because modeling the systems of the world around us can sometimes involve quite complex mathematics. But to give students a sense of how parameters relate to each other in the system, they can investigate an existing model of how that model behaves by changing the parameters. And here, for example, students are developing their understanding of the climate system by trying to manipulate these inputs to create specified outputs. They don't need to be told in this process whether they've got their inputs right or wrong, because they can see for themselves whether they've been able to generate the output they needed. And that's meaningful feedback, a very natural form of learning. So this type of climate model then would enable them to change the balance here of the parameters of renewable against non-renewable energies and see the effects of the global mean temperature. Then another model here, which you will get these slides, so do try out this model as well. It's a bit difficult to show this on the screen as we have it set up at the moment, but you can try that out and see the effects of varying the carbon emissions, the yearly carbon emissions, and what effect that has on global warming, and how you would have to reduce them in order to have no global warming. And that's a very important process for students to interact with and so understand. So do try that out. Learning through practice then, the learner is using the learning environment set up by the teacher, and there's an example of the climate model they might use. They're asked to achieve a goal, they generate an action, they receive feedback from that model, and then they respond by revising that action and get more feedback. And they may also need to think about what their conceptualization is in order to generate a better action. And so all of those cycles make the learner very active at both levels of concepts and practices. And of course, notice that in this case, they're not involving their colleagues, their fellow students, and they're not interacting with the teacher, because the model itself is providing all that motivating feedback for them to work on and develop their understanding. Then learning through collaboration. Here's an example for how it's used in teacher professional development. This Padlet is being used for teachers to share the ways in which they use different digital goals in creating activities for their students. So what would this mean in terms of how collaboration looks? Well, here, each learner, whether they're a student or a teacher, anybody at any level, each learner is learning through practice by using that learning environment. For example, using a learning design tool, if they're a teacher, and then working on it together by sharing their practice and then linking the two by discussing the different solutions with their colleagues. So here we've moved on, just the learner on their own, trying to work with an environment, but they're bringing in the challenge of working with your colleague to try and agree what you're going to do in order to understand this idea. So it's that much more challenging. It's both practice and social learning involved at the same time. And then, of course, you can do that within learning through production as well, because ICT can also provide the tools for collaborating on a project for assessment. Whatever technologies the teachers and professionals use, and these are examples of computer-aided design tools. In this case, helping students to understand something about engine design. So they might use the climate model, they might use an engine design model. Either way, they're trying to work with that model to understand how best to operate it, what's the best output to produce, and in that process report and present on their understanding. There are so many possibilities for what we can do with these kinds of technologies. So how does ICT help with assessment? Well, learning through productions really describes any form of assessment because it's where students are reflecting on what do I know now, and then trying to represent that to the teacher or whoever's doing the assessment as a form of, maybe it's computer-aided design. That might be the learning environment they're using. But it might be an essay or a report, any sort of way in which the teacher wants the students to describe and produce evidence of what they've learned. Okay, so with digital methods then we have a much wider range of pedagogies that we can use for learning. So this small selection for learning through acquisition, we have digital books, animations, podcasts and so on. For inquiry, exploring the internet goes a long way. For practice, testing and working with a digital model where students, where the digital environment itself is giving students feedback on their actions. For discussion, using things like Menti for the whole class or for students online, wherever they are. For collaboration, collaborating on some kind of a design where they work together to try and produce the same output. For production, maybe you can assess students' work on an animation, like an animation as a water cycle, for example. How well have they really understood it? It's the most challenging, and in many ways, the most motivating way for students to represent what they're doing. So now we come to the question of who will develop the ICT pedagogies for these different types of learning. And I would argue that must be done by the global community of teachers, because who else knows enough about teaching and learning to be able to do that? We cannot leave that for corporate tech to design for us. So the argument turns then to what teachers need, and it's not realistic to expect that they can each do their own innovation. Developing pedagogic knowledge is like developing scientific knowledge. We have to do that collaboratively. The process must be open and shared, collaborative, and peer-reviewed. So I'm going to talk through one way of doing that. And here's a FutureLearn course. It's now running on FutureLearn platform. It's a massive open online course. It's on blended and online learning design. It's free and open to all teachers across the world, in all sectors and subject areas, and with a small fee for a certificate at the end, as Sky Zheng has already explained. So you can enroll at any time. Here's the link, and again, when you get these slides, you'll be able to link directly to it. And this now has over 12,000 active teachers working on the course. And the course exercises are based on using the learning design tool, which is what I will explain in a moment, so that teachers can explore and exchange their own ideas for good ways of supporting their learners. So by using MOOC platforms such as FutureLearn, we can build what we've called co-MOOCs. these are co-designed, massive, open online collaborations, because we're bringing the teachers together to collaborate. So their main features are these. They have video case studies. Sorry, let me forward a bit too far there. Video case studies from the target audience, and that's part of what makes them co-designed, is that we're generating these ideas and presentations from the very people who are in that community. The research findings are articulated, if that's coming from the research side of the university, and then with activities for people to engage in that. Discussion and contributions from knowledgeable professional participants, and as Sky was mentioning, that social learning element, where on every single step you can face up to challenges from the teachers or challenges from other peers also taking that same course, and those can be really quite dynamic discussions. And then we also look for, shared research on practice for that community knowledge building, which is all important. So what does a co-MOOC offer? These co-design courses give professionals a window on how their peers are solving the problems they all have, with case studies such as teachers in crisis contexts. So for this teaching online course, we were working with colleagues in Lebanon where they're teaching refugees in very challenging conditions. Or for medics who are adapting innovative treatments to local conditions. So they know what the research is, but it works a bit differently in their own context. So our perioperative medicine MOOC is a bit like that. Or there could be discussions where government officials exchange renewable energy solutions in the sustainable energy course. Or they might be sharing their ideas and solutions. So in this part of the discussion, this is where one of the participants is saying they can do so much more by improving social distancing. I believe having proper access to energy has a domino effect on many aspects of life. So they're sharing, they're very knowledgeable people. So bringing those people to share their ideas online is very important. And then in the community-based research MOOC, this is where we were working with citizen scientists, for example, who often use this kind of thing. And this is where they're sharing ideas and exchanging ideas about the research they're doing. So learning how to ask interview questions is a very important part of doing community-based research and exchanging those ideas as part of that. So the co-MOOCs we've created do have global reach. And you can see from the numbers here, for community-based research, as I just explained, that's being used for citizen scientists, and we've just started a new hybrid version of that to support students in Lebanon's public university, the Lebanese university, where their energy crisis there is making it very difficult for students to learn in the traditional way. So that's one country that, as Sky was suggesting, has completely changed its attitude to online learning, and they're doing a lot more of it now, of necessity. Transforming education is now being redesigned with communities on the Thai-Myanmar border, where they also face very challenging refugee crises. Teaching online has been redesigned by alumni of a previous run, now presented as all these are, actually in Arabic as well as in English. And sustainable energy access for communities, let's just look at that particular one in a bit more detail to see how the current research outputs from your university, for example, can be promoted to other universities around the world. So here's a video from the Sustainable Energy MOOC, where the researcher is saying we've had some success with this using organic waste to generate electricity. We've had some success with this, but we want to take this idea out of the lab. So what happens? That's what the video and the MOOC explain. So this is how your research has an immediate impact on end users around the world. The energy professionals everywhere need to know that your research found when you took it out of the lab. That course is also being offered, by the way, by the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, Global Network of Learning Cities. So the reach is genuinely large scale and could be much larger at no greater cost. All these courses on FutureLearn are there, so please take a look if you have a chance. And now we have to consider then how exactly do the teachers collaborate in such numbers to generate and build new ways of learning design knowledge. So I want to look at just one exercise in week 3 of the blended and online learning design course. This is a peer review exercise, and it asks participants to share and critique each other's learning designs. So they use the online learning design tool, which I'll show you in a second, and they use this to contribute a design according to a rubric, and then review 2 other designs according to the same rubric, and then reflect on your feedback exchanges and so improve your design. So all the teachers use the same rubric to create their learning design and then give feedback to each other, and that's that kind of exercise that any experienced professional could do, and it would work just as well. It might be in energy, or it might be in medicine, whatever kind of profession. So you might well, for example, be creating an action plan to manage alternative renewable energy sources guided by the research findings. So this is how knowledge building works. In this case, teachers revise their design after doing a peer review and then submit it for the educator to assess and curate as a public contribution to the field. And you can see there's quite a range of different kinds of designs being built. And that's how we build new learning design knowledge together, just as we do in science and scholarship. So here's the tool that creates that collection. The Learning Designer is a free online design tool. It's available to everyone, this link here. And it turns the theory-based conversational framework into action. And it does this by providing a clear structure for developing a sequence of learning activities to achieve the outcomes that you define. So the tool helps teachers create their own learning designs for conventional digital and online learning, or adapt those that other teachers have already contributed. So this is a way of helping them articulate how they intend to support their students' learning. And they can then use the tool to analyze their designs and then also make them public for other teachers to see their way of using digital methods. So let's see what teachers could do with this. On the website, you can either adapt or create, as I said, and adapting and testing other people's designs is how we develop knowledge collaboratively. So it's a little like building on someone else's research as we do in science and scholarship. So on the browser screen here, here's one example of one group of learning designs. You select the learning design you want to try, and I'm going to try one on sustainable development. And looking at this on the designer screen, I can see that this has the kinds of learning objectives I'm interested in. This teacher has done it for 25 students. It takes 90 minutes, partly in class and partly at home. And the aims look reasonable, so I want to use this for myself. So I'm going to click on Edit, and now I get the same design, but now it's mine, and I can change anything on the screen that I like. So it's a very open and reusable kind of object. But the main change I want to make is to reduce the dependence on student discussion. So it's added up all the amount of time I've assigned to different kinds of learning activity. And there's a lot of discussion learning here, it's that blue area. And I want to change that to a practice where they're going to be playing with this climate model. So I've changed that. If you can see, as I go backwards and forwards between those two, that activity changes from discussion to a purple practice activity, and you can see how the pie chart changes as a result. So it's constantly tracking your design to say, okay, we've now got a different design here, and this is how it looks now. So with the students being able now to interact with this model, and I'll just explain this a bit so you can see more clearly what's going on here. We can see the two different activities at home and in class, and you create each of the different steps in each of these different sessions. You define the number of minutes they're meant to spend on it, what size the group class is. Well, in this case, it's all working at home, so it's an individual. Here they're in class, so that's whole class, 25. And if you had 100, then that would be 100. A small group of 3, and so on. And then we can specify whether the teacher's there or not, so they're not when the student's working at home, but all the way through, that's ticked when they're in class. Is it online? Yes, all the work they do at home is. This one is not in class when they're just watching the teacher's presentation, but then they are using it. And then these calendar signs are ticked because they're together in class, whereas when they're working at home, it's not ticked. They can do it at any time. And then there are some resources attached. In this case, they need to have attached the video, so that's indicated by this little paperclip sign. And you can see the color coding of all the different types of learning there. So now we could analyze my learning design in relation to the one I looked at previously. So this is the two analysis screens, where I'm able to see what kind of learning experience overall I've created for the students. So you can see the difference here between the types of learning. This has now got more types of learning in it. But the experience in terms of whether it's face-to-face or online, the teacher's present or not, it's synchronous or asynchronous, that's the same for all of them, both of them. The whole class amount of time, proportion of time has stayed the same, but the group proportion has now got smaller and the individual proportion has got larger. So now it's just up to me really to decide whether that's appropriate. There are no rules about this, you make those decisions for yourself. So once you've got to the point where that design is ready to be shared, now I can make it public and I can offer it to the rest of the world to understand how best to develop this collective knowledge of how to use IT. So learning design tools like the Learning Designer and the collaboration tools like the co-MOOCs on future learning then begin to meet the scale that we need for our most ambitious projects, for that quality education, SDG, as part of what we have to do for all of those UN Sustainable Development Goals, creating the means by which all of those professionals can share their ideas, their problems and solutions on a global scale. So we're nothing if not ambitious. So finally, to return to the questions we began with, what do students most need from EdTech? And I would say more active learning and more social learning, and we've seen several examples of that. Who will develop the new digital pedagogies? Trust the teachers to do that development. They're the ones with the best knowledge of this. And what do they need? Well, they certainly need the means to innovate collaboratively, and those two online tools I've suggested certainly go some way to offering that. And of course they need the time to do it, so understanding how to allow teachers who are very pressed in terms of workload to have the time to do even this small amount of a little bit of development and innovation each, and then build on what other people have done as well. That's very important. So this is how we address the transformative power of education. It comes from the transformative power of teachers. And then we also have a new book, which is out just a few months ago, where all of these problems and ideas are being discussed. And I hope maybe I will see some of you at menti.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Diana, for your engaging and informative presentation. Mr. Sevenjin already wrote his question on the menti.
So where the assessment, education or testing is integrated in the framework, how does ICT empower this point? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes? So that was where I was describing learning through production, because that's what we always ask students to do when we're doing assessment. We ask them to produce something which is evidence of what they've learned. So that learning through production is that final part of the conversational framework where they're going through the cycles of what they've learned, pulling that together and producing something for the teacher. And then they get some feedback from the teacher, so there's a further cycle there. So how does ICT empower this part? And all the kinds of digital tools they can use for producing some representation of what they know. And it could just be an essay or a report, but it could also be a model. They could develop their own model. They could develop their own animation. They could develop their own set of PowerPoint slides. There are many different kinds of digital tools they could use for that. So all of those would be there. Now there's another question there. What are the key features of Luhmann's system theory? Is that right? Is that a question? I'm afraid I don't know what Luhmann's system theory on would be and how that would be relevant. So I'm sorry.
Probably that one is not the question.
Sorry?
Probably that one is not the question.
No, I think I'm just trying to answer that question about assessment. I hope that was acceptable.
Is there anyone who wants to ask a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
My question is that there has been a trend that the digital courses are designed based on 100% videos, so which means in your framework it's just one way from the teacher to the learners.
Yes.
Do you think that the digital pedagogy should be contextualized depending on what type of content, who is the learner, what form of education, what levels, so the pedagogy should be changed towards different contexts?
No, because the basic point of the conversation framework is that it's based on, well, over 100 years of work on student learning and what it takes to learn. And what it takes to learn is more than just reading, watching, listening. You've got to think about what you're doing, and it doesn't stay otherwise. And the greatest test of that is once you've read something, you think, yes, I understand all that. Now try to answer that quiz question or something like that, and it's remarkably difficult. You have to go back again. You don't absorb it all just by reading, watching, and listening. So I'm afraid the 100% video is not an answer at all. People will become aware of things, but that's not the same as learning. So all of those different types of learning are very important ways of enabling you to think, and think in a practical way so that you can use those ideas in practice, and then also inform those ideas from what you do in practice. That's the whole point of all of those things. So I'm afraid I would say, no, not that sort of contextualization. Cultural contextualization, yes. And the great thing about MOOCs is that you can involve people from so many different cultures and ask them all to talk about this bit of theory or this bit of practice. And say, what's your response to that? How would that work in your context? And all sorts of things come out, which would then contextualize the content. So yes, from that point of view, contextualization is important. And in some cases, things won't work at all, and teachers don't have that kind of autonomy, and the students will not stand up and ask questions of the teacher or whatever. So then you have to work with, what does that mean? So contextualize the content, yes, but the pedagogy is fundamental to the way in which we learn about the world. That's my answer.
Is there any other question? Okay, I will ask a question. Okay. I'm just curious, are there any upcoming research projects or initiatives at UCL Knowledge Lab that you are yourself is particularly excited about in the context of digital learning?
Well, inevitably, over the last year or so, everyone's got very excited about AI and what AI can do. And every time AI comes up with something new, I get very excited and think, what could this be? And then every time I look into it in detail, I get very disappointed. And ChatGPT and all the interest in generative AI and so on has been another of those examples. When I think if only they'd come to us and said, what do you need in education, rather than just giving us a tool, we would never have said what we really need is a tool that writes students' essays for them and puts lots of mistakes into them. We would not have asked for that. We've got it, and now we've got to do something with what ChatGPT offers. And we have to educate our students in how best to use it. And I am quite excited about that, because it's like a kind of you can get students into a kind of dialogue with ChatGPT and understand how to master it, how to make yourself master of that process. And that is quite exciting because it can be more engaging than any amount of working with your colleague or working with a teacher who only have limited time. ChatGPT has unlimited time. You have to understand what it can do and what it can't do, and students have to understand that too. So I'm on the one hand very excited about it, and on the other hand very cross that it's creating an awful lot of work for teachers now, because we have to come up with much better ways of assisting students, which are much more time consuming. So I'm worried about how that's going to develop, but I think that is an exciting project nonetheless.
Actually, I'm very happy that you bring up AI, because my next question was about this one, because I was just going to ask, like, what are your thoughts on personalized learning experiences? Because nowadays, like, leading universities and big platforms are in the urge of like using AI and machine learning for educational data to make it more personalized for diverse needs of the students and learners. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, personalized learning is interesting because what people have often done, for example, I don't know if you remember, learning styles were very popular at one point, and understanding whether a student was a visual learner or liked learning through reading and so on, and you would respond to what they need given their preferences. Now that seems to me the worst thing to do in education, is to give students what they happen to prefer rather than what they should have experience of in order to increase what they're capable of. So, okay, maybe they prefer to learn from videos, but they've got to learn from reading as well, so you've got to take them through that process. It's essentially the responsibility of educators to do that. So that kind of personalizing I would not accept. But the kind of personalization that AI does is, most of what AI in education has done is to identify what the student doesn't know and give them more of it. So it's very much like saying, okay, you didn't understand that bit of the reading or the video, so we're going to play it again for you. Or you might give them a more detailed version of it or something like that. But that's just telling them again. If you engage them in some way and try to work out what is it that could interest them in this, or what would make this an interesting question, or why might they want to do that work of trying to work a bit harder to understand it? And it could be something very simple, like getting students, let's say in a school class, to use something to design a website that describes what this energy concept means, or something like that. Now that's a creative process, and they love that. So they would work at it. So the more that you can make learning an active process for the student, the better. Now, is that personalizing? What's good for that student is good for all students. And this is something that we find out more and more as we're using education in an exclusive way, and in an inclusive way. So, for example, anything that you're trying to do for students with various kinds of disabilities, if you make it easier for students to be able to listen as well as see when you read, all students like that. So when I was at the Open University, for example, we had a very high proportion of students, and there were hundreds of students, who were blind and partially sighted. So we created audio books, and they would read all the course materials and everything. And so all students would apply for having those audio cassettes sent to them, because it was valuable for everybody. So often, if you personalize for someone who has a special need, it's great for everyone. So I think you approach personalization with that critical viewpoint, really. How good is this really, and how can we make it great for everybody?
Okay, thank you so much.
That's a very nice question.
Okay, thank you so much.